So I'm Scott Pegau. I'm the Research Program Manager for the Oil Spill Recovery Institute. And I also coordinate the Herring Research and Monitoring Program that the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council puts on. And, you know, seeing that this past Sunday was 30 years since the Exxon Valdez went aground and had a major spill, I thought, you know, we should have something about it, but I gotta admit, I was the one that was highly reluctant to come and talk about the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So I'm choosing not to. I'm gonna talk about some of the research programs, the long-term research that's occurred since then. But I'm also it's gonna be very short on what the research has been. I have a couple videos, one from Osprey because we are celebrating our 20th anniversary, and one from the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council. And then, you know, I'm more than willing to answer questions. Like I said, I just could not bring myself to talk about recovery from the Exxon Valdez oil spill itself. So hopefully you'll still learn something interesting. The movies will show you enough about the oil spill, I think. And like I said, I'm more than willing to answer questions. So I'm going to talk about the two programs, the Oil Spill Recovery Institute and the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council's research programs. Oh, we found our first thing that...
First glitch.
Our first...
Oh,
I have to be closer. And then I probably went through a lot. So, first, my disclaimer. I do not represent the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council in any way. I'm sure that they had much more official language that I was supposed to use. I am funded by the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council, and I'm going to talk a little bit about their programs, but I do want to make sure that if anyone told them that I was talking about them, that I had put a disclaimer in. This one's just a hair short. So, Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council funds are based off the $900 million civil settlement that occurred after the oil spill. And those funds are for use for restoration. Part of restoration is also monitoring to see what the natural recovery is. When they set up the settlement money, afterwards they split the pot of money, that $900 million, into two pots. One that they use for land acquisition, and one that is for the restoration activities, which is the portion that they have used to support research over the years. My impression from looking at other oil spills and how this process works is it was never conceived as a long-term research program. Normally the spill occurs, there's a settlement, the agencies somehow use all the money and things move on. But I think $900 million was one reason. They weren't able to spend it fast enough. I think by Deepwater Horizon, states learned a little bit better, and they're able to spend a lot of money very rapidly on things that probably won't help. But you know, that was one thing. But more importantly, locally, the fishermen blockaded the Valdez Narrows, and in part that drove the trustee process to not just hand the money over to the state and federal agencies, but instead focus it on research that then applied to everyone in Prince William Sound. And so I actually tend to give most of the credit to the fishermen for setting up the long-term research program that has come out of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council. Okay, so C project people, did I get my years right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. So sound ecosystem assessment. So after the trustee council got set up, one of their first large integrated programs was called the Sound Ecosystem Assessment Program. And it was studying pink salmon and Pacific herring. Most of the work was pink salmon. It was looking at the lake river hypothesis, whether Prince William Sound is a lake where things stay in it, or if it's a river that things come and go through it, and what are the different situations that come in. Right after that, there was the apex predator experiment. There was another large integrated program that I never remember. It was the intertidal related one. And then for many years, there were just individual projects that were being funded, and they weren't necessarily connected. In about 2005, they worked on trying to establish a Gulf ecosystem monitoring program. They just about had it, and then the governor at the time said, I don't want any of this ecosystem stuff, and managed to get his trustees to kind of kill that long-term monitoring program. His daughter is currently a senator. Yeah.
NVP, nearshore vertebrate predators.
And nearshore, okay, thanks. So that kind of was starting there and then died off. In 2009, they set up an integrated herring research program. They realized that the little projects here and there, really they weren't learning as much as that they had hoped. And so by integrating the different types of things together, they were hoping to be able to get more answers than they were ever be able to get from a whole bunch of different research. And after that got going in 2012, they decided, okay, we're going to set up 2 long-term monitoring programs or research programs. Gulf Watch Alaska is an ecosystem monitoring program. It is that GEM program brought back to life, and it was designed as a 20-year monitoring program. And the Herring Research and Monitoring Program, which is a little different because we actually have research projects along with the monitoring projects. So Gulf Watch Alaska is just monitoring conditions from everything from basic physics to whales. So they're monitoring those conditions both in the water column and the intertidal area. Whereas herring research and monitoring, a lot of it is monitoring, but there are components where we're trying to actually answer, okay, why are we seeing what we're seeing? So those are the main Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council activities that I wanted to highlight. Oh, here we go. We're gonna. No, I have this fancy brand new clicker that turns out to only reach this far. The Oil Spill Recovery Institute, and I can say I represent the Oil Spill Recovery Institute. I'm the research program manager there. We were established under the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. But our funding really it took them several years to figure out how to set up the funding mechanism to fund the research that was outlined in the Oil Pollution Act. So our funding first arrived in 1997, and really our first big sets of projects started in 1998. So our 20th anniversary was actually last year, but I'm still celebrating. We're funded off the interest of $35 million that's in the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. You know, interest rates aren't great, $35 million is, so it works out that we have about $800,000 a year right now for everything. That's admin through what we send out the door for programs. And we fund research, education, and demonstration projects that help us understand and respond to oil spills in the Arctic and subarctic marine environments. And so over the years, we started as a Prince William Sound, Exxon Valdez centric organization, and the legislature expanded our scope so that we actually cover Arctic and subarctic these days. We have the four main approaches that we use for funding things. We want to fund things that help us understand the recovery from oil spills. We want to fund things that help us respond to oil spills so that we can recover the oil better, more quickly. We want to inform, and we want to inform the public, the spill response community, and we use it for education of everything from kindergarten students up through graduate students. And so we're trying to bring in that next set of either agency people or the spill responders itself. And to do anything in Alaska is expensive, so we pretty much have to partner as much as we can to be able to afford what we do. I will learn the point. So OSRI activities, some of the things that we've done when we first got organized, the big thrust was nowcast forecast. We wanted to be able to improve our understanding of the circulation in Prince William Sound, atmospheric, oceanographic, so that we could have a better forecast of the ecological conditions and be able to better inform the spill response models. Doing that, we partnered with the Alaska Ocean Observing System and the North Pacific Research Board to help us understand what's going on. We definitely are involved in a lot of new technologies. One of our projects was contributing to the testing of the crucial skimmers. So if you ever hear fuzzy disc skimmers, the big ones that are now on the barge were built in a guy's garage. A guy down in Louisiana built them as for a contest that was being put on by the shipping company. And it now is kind of the state of the art for skimmers that are out there. We also support a lot of graduate fellowships, and that's where a lot of our work, particularly in Prince William Sound, continues to get done, working on degradation of oil in the Sound, the oil that exists, and also what would happen in the water column. The picture there is from Prince William Sound, dug a hole in one of the spots that still has lingering Exxon Valdez oil, waited 15 minutes, and then put in the absorb just for a little bit of contrast to show you what it can look like in some of the areas. It's actually pretty hard to find if you don't know where it's at, but when you find it, it can be pretty impressive like that. With that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and run a pair of movies. The first one will be from the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council, and then the second one's from OSRI, and then have a conversation about what's happening. I cringe because I hear my voice in both of these movies and I don't like it. It's so much easier when you can't hear yourself.
For longer than memory can tell, humans have been drawn to the waters of Prince William Sound for its overwhelming beauty and bountiful resources. The Chugach-Chalutiq depended on the area for critical resources like salmon. Russians hunted these waters for valuable otter pelts, and Americans flooded Valdez en route to interior gold prospects. After Alaska became the 49th state in 1959, focus began to shift towards a new bonanza of black gold. The 1968 discovery of the Prudhoe Bay oil fields would change Alaska's economy forever. with the construction of the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline running from the North Slope to the port of Valdez. With the completion of the $8 billion pipeline, oil production quickly became the main economic driver in the young state, raising incomes and leading to the creation of the Alaska Permanent Fund. But as the money started piling up, so did concerns about how the oil was being transported after it left the pipeline.
Oil tankers will be moving in Alaskan waters for the next 25 years. They are the largest and potentially the most dangerous of man's creations ever to sail the oceans. Alaska Review took a look at what their presence might mean to Alaska.
What does it mean to the state of Alaska to have built environmentally and technically the finest pipeline that has ever been built in history to then transport our oil through our fragile marine ecosystems, if you will, in tankers that are technically and environmentally obsolete?
Do you think the tanker fleet in the Port of Valdez is of a standard of the rest of the pipeline?
Not yet.
At 12:04 a.m., March 24th, 1989, the tanker Exxon Valdez struck Bly Reef.
We're approaching the Exxon Valdez. She's hard aground. She's got the starboard slop tag, starboard wing tank, and possibly 5 center are impacted.
It was the beginning of the greatest environmental disaster in Alaska's history.
We're at her stern. Smell oil over here on the side, on the downwind side.
When the sun came up the next day, it was clear this place would never be the same.
Oil on the deck of the ship. Oil in the water. Glacier Island off the bow there.
Almost 9 hours after the grounding, the waters around the leaking supertanker were still quiet. There were no skimmers, no skiffs deploying booms, nothing to stop the oil from spreading.
There's the buoy
It was a tragedy that would develop in slow motion.
where the oil was out there.
Over 16 hours had already been lost before the first oil-containing crew finally arrived. They didn't have enough skimmers, skiffs, or booms to control the growing sea of oil already miles wide. Efforts to offload the oil had already been started, but were delayed due to lack of equipment. The cavalry may have arrived, but without the guns, horses, or men needed for a fight. Sea conditions were ideal for containment, yet first responders struggled to control the situation. Without the necessary preparation and response, it was simply too late the instant the supertanker ran aground. It wouldn't take long before this huge problem became a huge story.
This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. An oil tanker ran aground today off the nation's northernmost ice-free port, Valdez, Alaska. The first pictures are just in, and the consequences are costly. Tonight, the Interior Department said it fears that much wildlife will be killed.
Those fears would soon become a grim reality. As the eyes of the world descended on Prince William Sound, growing teams of skimmers and booms fought to contain and recover the slick of oil. On March 27th, 3 frantic days after the grounding, time ran out. A storm arrived in Prince William Sound, pushing the oil onto beaches and making containment an impossible fantasy. In the end, 11 million gallons of oil was spilled from the Exxon Valdez, the equivalent of 17 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The oil would eventually spread 470 miles throughout Prince William Sound and down the Alaska Peninsula towards Kodiak, affecting an estimated 1,300 miles of shoreline. In the hardest hit areas, wildlife and ecosystems were devastated.
If you're an air-breathing animal and you're affected by the spill, meaning you're a marine mammal that has to breathe just above, come up to the surface of the oil and then breathe in this airspace that's literally inches above that. There's vapors there, so they're inhaling vapors. If you're a bird, a diving bird, a marine bird, you're landing on the water, you're getting oil in your feathers and whatnot. If you're a sea otter, you live on the surface of the water, you dive, that you live on the surface. If you're an air-breathing animal that's exposed to oil, you're going to be deeply affected acutely and relatively swiftly. And so as a consequence, the normal thing in the spill is you find lots of carcasses.
As images of the aftermath began to spread, an unprecedented cleanup effort began to mobilize.
Eventually, the oil will degenerate into a thick foam. It will have to be raked up by hand and put into containers. On rocky shores like this, high-pressure hoses can be used to blast the oil back to the water, or it can be picked up by skimmers. But eventually, people are going to have to kneel down each rock and scrub them by hand.
At the time, it was the largest cleanup effort in history, utilizing 10,000 workers, 1,000 vessels, 100 aircraft, and extended into 4 years.
Before the spill, I had spent weeks in Prince William Sound kayaking around and seeing it in its pristine condition. During the spill, within about 2 weeks of the spill, I found myself on a beach in what was like a major industrial scene that you would find in any highly industrialized state, a petroleum refinery or something, with the associated smells and sounds, and the contrast was almost couldn't be described. It just kind of took your mind away when you saw what was formerly pristine and now was totally despoiled. I didn't have any concept of how bad or big this was going to be. It just absolutely stunned you. It was nothing that your mind couldn't have been prepared for.
With the arduous cleanup underway, efforts to assess the damage to the environment began.
It was crazy. Everybody tells stories about those days, the first couple of years. Everybody was scrambling to try and document and capture the impacts.
One of the biggest things, we didn't know what it was like. As attorneys, we first asked the scientists, so what's the damage? And one of their reactions was, we don't know very well. The baseline is simply not there. There had not been much research.
There just wasn't anything. So you really had to start literally, from the ground up and learn not just is the species present, but its life history, how it behaves, what are its normal presence in the sound and its role in the sound.
As the magnitude of the damage became clear, the state of Alaska and the federal government struck an agreement to jointly oversee the recovery of Prince William Sound.
We reached an agreement with the federal government as to how the use of damages, and we knew there would be damages, would be expended. The result was the formation of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council. It's required the federal and all the state trustees to all come together and come up with a common plan. And a good way to accomplish the mission, and that mission is, in one word, restoration.
It had a lot of influence, a lot of effect then in terms of the science of oil spills. It's a very dramatic turning point between how spills were studied prior to Exxon Valdez and how they're studied Exxon Valdez and post Exxon Valdez. Very, very different. Much better science, much better understanding. Now it's 30 years later. Even at 20 years, we saw lots of recovery within 2 or 3 years. There's some species, killer whales, for example, with long life histories and low reproductive potential, where their recovery is very slow. The AV pod is not recovered all the way to where it was because of those low reproductive rates. AT1 pod, the transient pod, will never recover because all the females, all the reproductive females, were lost. But most of the species, pink salmon with a high reproductive capability, recovered in several years after the oil was cleaned out of the intertidal zone enough that the elevated embryo mortality no longer occurred. Their populations bounced right back up. It's not always that simple or that easy. The herring, for example.
Herring is one of the species that was identified as being impacted by the Exxon Valdez oil spill. It is a critical species. It's a forage fish, so it's a small fish. And basically, everything in Prince William Sound eats herring at some stage. The birds are eating the eggs, or they're eating the young fish, or all the way to the adults, the whales, the sea lions. So if you want to see the most active time in Prince William Sound, you want to be at the herring spawn. After the oil spill, the fish actually did okay for a couple of years, then the population crashed, and it went from well over 100,000 tons down into around 20,000 tons. And in the most recent years, it's dropped down somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 tons. Did the ecosystem change? Was there a tipping point that now prevents the herring from recovering? Currently, we are doing a lot of different work as far as surveys so that we know what that herring population looks like, modeling of that herring population. There's 3 major diseases that we are looking at. I can't pronounce them, so I'm not going there. We're looking at how they move. But there's still hope that the herring are going to recover because of how its biology works. One of the big issues remains that you can find oil in some of the beaches. We call it the lingering oil.
The oil has persisted in the environment much longer than anyone anticipated. The sound from a distance appeared fine and pristine again, but when we started digging in, literally, that's when we discovered, some of these species may not be recovering because there's potentially still oil in the environment that they're getting exposed to.
It looks fine. The beaches, you would not be able to tell there's been an oil spill unless you bring a shovel. You dig down 12 inches, you get this, which, if you could smell it, it's nothing but oiled gravel, oiled rocks, and it's heavy oil, and it smells like oil.
And we're talking about actual liquid oil that still has volatile components to it, and once an organism gets into it, it's not a good thing.
This lingering oil, to me, is a heart versus head question. The heart says, take it out. The head says, I will cause more damage taking it out than I will by leaving it in. And until we can find a way that we can actually go on the beach, turn everything over, get the oil out without destroying the beach, we're always going to have this problem.
In 2010, it was estimated that approximately 23,000 gallons of oil remained in Prince William Sound. Recent studies in 2015 found that there had been essentially no change in the estimated total area of subsurface oil at several sites. For all but the youngest Alaskans, we may never live to see a day when there's no oil hidden in the beaches and coves of Prince William Sound. It remains a vivid reminder of a distant mistake.
Why do we need the council? I go into Prince William Sound, I don't see any oil. I see plenty of otters, I see orcas, I see birds. I think all of that is true, but we have to remember that part of the bottom line is that there's some things you just can't fix. You can't have an orca factory. Well, there are some species, like primarily herring, that need continual study. And secondly, the council's mission is not only restoration, rehabilitation, replacement, but also enhancement.
30 years after the spill, the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council continues to help monitor lingering oil, aid in the recovery of spill-affected species, and help projects with the overall mission of restoring affected areas to their pre-spill condition.
One of the enduring legacies of the spill will be the fact that there is now a baseline. We now know what's out there. If there is another issue, whether it's a disaster such as an oil spill, but even if it's of a larger scale like climate change, we now know what was there before, and people will be able to quantify damages and changes in the environment.
Every year, I appreciate that things are improving, things are really, there's still more to the story, not all of it is done yet.
Everybody asks that question. I even asked that question. Why are we still here? There is good reason. There is work that can be done in the future. There will be future challenges for species injured by the spill. So it is important.
Prince William Sound is a treasure for all Alaskans and an inheritance worth investing in. By learning from its past and planning for the future, we can continue to enjoy its beauty for generations.
Hopefully, the next one will start depressing and then hopefully get better. Now you know why I didn't want to talk about recovery from the Exxon Valdez. History of the Oil Spill Recovery Institute is the Exxon Valdez oil spill. The Exxon Valdez is a tanker that was coming out of Valdez on its way south. It veered out of the tanker lanes to avoid ice that was coming off of the glacier. Never turned back. It hit glide reef, and so this is March 24th, 1989, and it spills 11 million gallons of oil into Prince William Sound. It had a huge impact on the area. But the Oil Spill Recovery Institute was one of the things that was done in response in the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. OSRI's mission is to support research and demonstration projects that improve our understanding and ability to respond to oil spills in the marine environment in the Arctic and subarctic.
I think OSRI is an important organization because it continues to be that wake-up call to us, that we need to always be looking at technologies, at research, at monitoring, and making sure that we're prepared.
So I think they play a really vibrant role, and I think if you've ever experienced a spill, and I have when I grew up in Rhode Island, it can be devastating, and Prince William Sound obviously knows that all too well, the communities that dealt with the Exxon Valdez spill. So I think that their ability to continue to keep information front and center, keep people's awareness front and center, work with the Prince William Sound Science Center, the Alaska Sea Life Center, Defenders of Wildlife, and others, I think that keeps that momentum moving.
Our work is based on a strategic plan that has 4 goals: to understand, to respond, to inform, and to partner. Understand is to understand the impacts of oil spills. Respond is to improve our ability to respond to oil spills. Inform, we're trying to inform the public and spill responders of where we are and what our needs are. And then to do this, it has to be done through partnership. When we look at respond type goals, the first that we put a lot of effort into is improving our ability to detect oil. If you can't find the oil, you can't clean it up. And this is particularly true in the ice environment. We've had a project that looked at aerostats, which are balloons that are tethered to the boat that can take up a camera system or other detectors.
Recovery Institute funding is really helpful in this mission to conduct objective and applied science that really focuses on a serious problem in the Alaskan marine environment, which is the potential for oil spills and the question of how to clean them up when they occur. The Oil Spill Recovery Institute's research funding for graduate fellowships has also been really valuable. I've had 2 PhD students so far who've had funding through that mechanism, and it's been really critical in filling funding gaps in their research program, but also giving them experience in writing their own grant proposals and managing their own funding, their own budgets.
I think OSRI's investment in research and development for oil spill response technology has instigated creativity among scientists and partnerships between industry and researchers. And we're a nimble organization. We can fill gaps and take approaches that other more bureaucratic organizations can't do or aren't charged to do.
Over the last 20 years, OSRI has funded 173 different projects at about $14.5 million. Results of that have been over 109 publications. We've supported 22 graduate students, and those graduate students are the people that we expect to be in charge of the next oil spill when it occurs. We've made great steps in improving our understanding of oil spills and how to respond to them, but we still have a lot to learn. We all want to minimize impact to the environment, and the only way we can do it is if we work together. So with that, I'll have to open it up to questions or discussion. One little beach, Northwest Bay on Eleanor Island, that showed up several times. The patch of oil that we've been digging on was actually a site that was, they tried to remediate. And so they tried to remove the oil from that particular patch of beach, and that's how I can find it because I know where their markers are. It's probably the size of these benches right here. There's a second spot on that beach that I know exists. I've seen the oil come out of it, and every time I go in there, I go searching for it, and I have yet to find that second spot. You know, that's how hard it can be to find some of the places that are out there. But if you do find some of the places, the oil that's in there is essentially 11-day-old oil. It went in as it hit the beach. One of the big issues that we realized afterwards was that high pressure wash. The high pressure, high temperature wash actually sterilized the beaches, and it took the beaches longer to recover than those beaches that they didn't actually treat. You know, if they had enough exposure that the oil was being removed. And so, you know, unfortunately there were lessons learned, but that's part of why I always say it's a heart versus head, is we're not really good at taking something fully apart and putting it back together properly. And so right now, we are not finding evidence of that lingering oil in the environment. You know, there's been monitoring programs where we try to detect it either in the tissues of the blue mussel, which will accumulate the hydrocarbons, or using the scientific equivalent of that tissue. You know, and we're not finding it. We're not finding it in the blood of the harlequin ducks anymore, where if the vertebrate is exposed to oil, there's a mechanism in the body that kicks on and starts producing an enzyme for dealing with trying to process oil. And so we use that as an indicator of if the animals are being exposed to oil, and we're not finding that anymore. So right now, it's buried, it's just buried really shallow. And we did take dogs out. It was one of the more fun experiments with Osri. We took dogs out, and dogs can find it. So, you know, it's not buried so far that a dog can't figure it out, but, you know, we're not finding impacts beyond that. Did you have a question, Steve?
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind just kind of expounding on herring for a moment. And,
Sure.
And first of all, on the photos, there's a reason I didn't take any photos between 1989 and 1992. I have none, and there's a reason for that. You showed those.
Yeah.
But take herring, for example. I mean, where does the oil spill leave off and climate change take over? And is there some kind of, I mean, if we're down to 4% of the herring that were here at the height,
yeah.
I mean, is there a regime change going on? Is there another forage fish moving in, or what?
There's not another forage fish moving in. All the forage fish have been struggling in recent years. So we're not seeing something take that niche. We're not seeing like Euphausids, any of Sandlance, Capelin, any of the others that we would think of as equivalent. One of the real complex factors is there was a regime shift that occurred in 1989, and so it's trying to figure out which one is responsible. You know, part of what I've looked at in the past was over in Kachemak Bay, and in 1989, all of a sudden the biomass of flatfish increased by a factor of 4. You know, and then, you know, I was looking at it because I was looking at the shrimp population, and the shrimp population didn't have a chance once you put that many flatfish in. So I think it was fighting climate change at the exact same time. Our comparable is basically Sitka, Prince William Sound, and Sitka tend to recruit together. That means the young fish, good years for young fish, tend to be the same in both locations. And you know, Sitka's population just didn't crash, and so they've gone through a long period where they just started at a higher level, so they didn't have spectacular recruitment until the last few years, but they had plenty to support the population, and we didn't have that. Our population started dropping again in 2015. I thought we were all set for really strong recruitment. Sitka got it. Like I said, they generally go together. There's some indication that the disease that we think that took the population out the first time swept through again in 2015. And so now we're trying to rebuild from an even lower spot. The best news I've heard this year is Sitka is just plugged full of young fish. They haven't had a fishery yet, is my understanding, because all they're catching are like 3-year-old fish, which if the pattern holds, that means that we've got a lot of young fish out there. We've definitely seen them in the harbor through this winter, which is a pretty good sign. And we don't see that very often to make it through the winter here. So it has me hopeful, but I'm always hopeful that they're gonna make it back.
Yeah. In the 90s, somebody found some of the California oil that spilled from the '64 earthquake.
Yeah.
Has anybody looked for that again to see if it's still there?
Yeah, there's you know, in fact, that Northwest Bay, I can find there's a few spots of it in there. You don't find it in the same way. It's not buried so much in the sediment as it's on top, you know, because that was during the '64 earthquake. The oil tanks that ruptured, they brought the oil out, but you know, when it landed on the beaches, it never had that kind of drive into the sediment, and you know, so you tend to find it on the surface. Last year there was a researcher up here that was specifically going to places looking for either the '64 earthquake or some of the old salteries and other places that, you know, had large oil tanks that over the years collapsed. and sampled that oil to see how it is. I haven't heard what they thought the state was, but what I've seen has always been asphalt. You know, looks like asphalt.
But it does suggest that the Exxon oil is gonna go through the same thing. It's gonna take decades for it to.
That's why we all thought it was gonna be gone by now.
But to
that
get the oil from
process.
64 still here, so why shouldn't newer oil persist any longer?
Because this new oil, when you pull it out of the ground, still has a chemical composition of 11-day-old oil. It is not degrading. The natural process is it degrades and becomes basically asphalt. And that's not happening.
Because
it
it was
is
crude rather than refined oil, you think that's what
they were both, but what happened was the oil got down into the sediments and is locked into the sediments so that the tide can't push it out and the atmosphere isn't bringing enough oxygen. So the microbes that normally degrade the oil, that eat the oil and shift it to that asphaltenes, they don't survive there. There's not enough oxygen. And so the 64 earthquake oil is all on the surface. It had plenty of oxygen and the microbes degraded.
You know how to get oxygen that deep?
That's
pour hydrogen peroxide all over.
That's exactly what they were doing. They were pumping hydrogen peroxide into that beach that I showed you. I keep going back to find lingering oil because I know they're markers.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about the microbes. I was at service training this year, and they've got a real slick PR guy who was talking about the Deepwater Horizon spill and how they found this huge bloom of the microbes that chew through oil. Like once there's all this oil there, it's like, oh, it's fine. The microbes will eat it all up. Everything's fine. Do you know any, I don't know much about those microbes. So that's a process that we have here in Prince William.
Oh yeah, those microbes are found in all the waters around the world that we've looked so far. We have found oil degrading microbes in it.
But they all need oxygen?
They all need oxygen, all the ones that I know of.
There are anaerobic bacteria, but those don't eat oil probably.
Yeah, the ones that, we're not aware of, ones that are eating it. There have been a few different studies here in Prince William Sound trying to look at what the natural degradation rate would be. So once oil is in the water column, what is that degradation rate? And it's really important because that really is how the oil is going to end up going away. In a major oil spill, the typical recovery rate is about 8 to 10% of the oil that's spilled. You lose about 40% to the atmosphere, depending on the oil. The rest, you're basically waiting for the microbes to eat. Yep.
When you say like depending on the oil, does that mean that oil sourced from different places have they react differently or they degrade differently?
Well, some are, there's a huge spectrum of oils. How much light end components are in that oil? If you think of refined products, bunker C, which is a little bit better than asphalt, but really super thick. That stuff, it takes forever, versus Macondo was a very light oil. It had a lot of gas, a lot of light ends, and those are the things that the microbes can eat really quickly. And so it all depends on how much wax is in there, how much asphalt is in there, what the composition is.
What's the oil like that we have in the Sound?
The stuff that is the North Slope crude is generally, it's a medium oil. It's actually one of the ones that most of the response techniques are designed to respond to. There's definitely other oils that it takes very specialized equipment to try to pull it out, or very unspecialized because you're basically down to a shovel trying to shovel the ocean off. Yeah?
You talk about the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico. It's obviously very warm water, and here's colder, and then you're also studying the Arctic. Well,
Yeah.
spills. So what's the story if you get say a spill in the Northwest Passage? I mean, these microbes are going to be...
They're going to be slower.
Cold water.
But remember, Deepwater Horizon, most of that spill occurred at depth that the water temperature is only 4 degrees C. So it's actually very similar to our wintertime water temperatures is where most of that degradation occurred. You know, lower temperatures, it goes a little slower, but you give it time, a little bit of time, it'll catch up and the microbe community will do their job.
Are they sensitive to salinity? Different species for different salinity?
Yeah, you know, because there is a real wide range of species that have degradation potential, you know, so it's not a species that does it, there's a whole suite and they use different mechanisms.
So maybe the main lesson from the Exxon Valdez is they should not have cleaned the beaches, huh?
Well, it is now not legal to use the mechanism that was used during the Exxon Valdez oil spill, except on man-made structures.
Okay.
You know, on a man-made structure, you're allowed to use that technique. They have concluded that even though it was fairly effective, it was not the right approach. And so now, instead of hot water, high pressure, they use primarily the cold water, low pressure. And so those going through SERVS training, you know, when you undo those really large soaker hoses, that was the lesson learned from one of the lessons learned from the Exxon Valdez oil spill. The most important for the oil companies was to take their names off their boats. And that was one of the first reactions. The real classic was one of the tanker spills that occurred soon after they had painted over the company name, but the boat was on fire, and as the fire spread, it peeled the paint off, re-exposing the company's name that was underneath it. But, you know, look, what do we have? We have Sea River Maritime, we have Crowley, we have, you know, all the companies. No one wants to have an Exxon Valdez. They don't want to be associated with that for the rest of their life, basically. And so it was one of the, you know, odd kind of reactions to having that oil spill. You know, I won't give them a whole lot of credit for it, for getting their names off the boats.
So the Arco boats are just the color of the hull, is that the only indication?
Yeah, but they're not Arco.
They're not Arco.
I can't remember the company, but yeah.
Got sold.
Yeah. Sorry.
How many other places around the world is there where they have something like SERVS, where the local fishing community, with their boats and their knowledge, are ready to do oil spill response?
None that I'm aware of.
Not in the entire world.
None that I'm aware of.
And is that, do you find that, I mean, is that something that you've tried to work into spread? I mean, it seems like such an obvious thing.
Yeah, no, and it's a topic of discussion in a lot of places. It always comes down to who's going to be supporting maintaining that fleet, and that's, you know, no oil company wants to support a fleet of boats like that. You know, they've got their contractors, so there's a couple major contractors that have big boats, but they don't have numbers of boats. And so in some ways, Prince William Sound, I think right now, has the most capability for responding to an oil spill. I would never want to have to find out how well we can do, because each oil spill is different. And, you know, I would not be surprised that even with all our efforts, we'd still be at 10 to 12% recovery if another one occurred, because whatever is going to happen is going to be something different than what we're truly prepared to deal with. Yeah, Shane.
You mentioned, you know, we're no longer seeing some of these acute signs of exposure to oil
Mhm.
organisms, and other than things like regime changes, are there long-term effects that we've seen in some of these populations, something at like the genetic level that's now being perpetuated, or mutations, or?
Oh, that's actually one of the herring projects that's currently underway, is they're trying to look for genetic changes that occurred after the Exxon Valdez. And so somewhere in the States, someone had been freezing herring back into the 70s. You know, not every year, but you know, there was 4 samples. One that was prior to the Exxon from Prince William, you know, another one that was soon after, one around 2000. So they were able to get genetic information. But the project is also, last year, collected eggs. They exposed eggs from Prince William Sound, Sitka, and Puget Sound to oil, and now they've been growing them up, you know, to see how healthy a fish they get, and to see if there are genetic differences between those fish that have been exposed and have not been exposed to oil. Yes?
So, with the herrings, there are loads of salmon hatcheries in the sound in Alaska. Any reason why there aren't any herring hatcheries, or why there wouldn't be?
Part of it is numbers, and part of it is knowing why they're not recovering. So, say you put out, well, so at an age 0 herring, if you just hatched the eggs and you got them up to their first summer and released them, you would expect I'm trying to remember what the number half. It's probably about 12% you'd expect to reach where they would be maturing. But if it's a disease that's causing the problem, you're just releasing fish and then the disease is killing them. Or if it's the whales that are consuming, you have to release an awful lot to feed enough whales so that they're full, and then you get to build the population. So part of it is knowing exactly why it's not recovering. Then you know what life stage you want to bring your fish to, because you know it's more expensive to get a fish all the way to 3 years old where it's going to reproduce. But if there's you know a bottleneck somewhere when it's young, you have to get across that before you release it. If it's something that's going to hit an adult fish, like the I actually can pronounce most of those names. So viral hemorrhagic septicemia took me 5 years of practice. I finally got it down. That is the one that you know has a period we think has gone through and made the major collapses occur. You know that if it's out there in the adult population, every time you bring in new fish, 90% of them will probably die due to that disease. So you get 12%, and then you lose the next 90%. So you have to be prepared to bring in a whole lot of fish unless you know exactly what's killing them.
So that
No, go ahead.
So that might be an option if all the herrings and these kinds of things protected.
Yes. Then you know where to do it. You know, because we've talked about things as simple as moving where the eggs are. Now the fish are doing that naturally for us because they're moving their spawning areas around. So it used to be almost all the spawning was Port Pravina, Sheep Bay, Port Fildago, and in the last few years, a bunch of the spawns on Hawkins Island at Canoe Pass. So now they have a new spawning area. That's essentially a new starting point for all their larvae. So it's a question of, will those be more successful than from another place because the path the water is going to take is going to retain them versus flush them out of Prince William Sound. Katrin?
I'm sorry, did you say that this new spawning, that was last year's spawning?
The last 2 or 3.
Definitely last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so.
So the current year class that are year zeros, they were in the new
50-50 chance. Last year was split between Gravina and Canoe Pass.
We discussed herring hatcheries quite a bit during the herring planning thing
Yeah.
with Doug Hay. The Japanese actually have some hatcheries, but we would have to like convert all the salmon hatcheries to herring hatcheries to have enough production to make it even important. If you want to really reseed the sound, just doing it experimentally is one thing, but doing it on an industrial scale, probably pretty prohibitive to be effective.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much for your attention.